Welcome to my review for Power Rangers Lost Galaxy. This was the first series that was outside of the Zordon era, and it was the final installment in the Power Rangers saga for the 1990s. And if you're new to the channel, I would like to hear your story. When did you start watching Power Rangers? What made you curious about this series? To provide a little bit of background, I first started watching the Power Rangers in 1993, when there was this explosion and Mighty Morphin Power Rangers just became the #1 kids show in the world, and I watched it rather regularly all the way up to the end of the 90s, watching both of the movies, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers the movie as well as Power Rangers Turbo, and I really fell in love with In Space. Some of you might remember what this feels like when you have your after-school show, the show that you watch immediately as soon as you get home. And for me, it was Power Rangers In Space. And, that was a very rough time because I was in the 5th grade, and there are a lot of emotional changes that people experience when they turn 9 years old or 10 years old, and so on. But I ultimately stopped watching Power Rangers after In Space because I felt that that series ended in a very good place. They had a very solid finale, and it didn't make sense to continue the storyline, so said me, being 9 or 10 years old, whatever I was. But they were doing these promotions for Power Rangers Lost Galaxy, and I still remember they would play the theme song, but this was my first experience to the show, watching it as an adult. And I remember the theme song being so much slower than it was when I watched it as an adult. But as I told you, I stopped with Power Rangers in Space, and I took 28 years off in between Power Rangers shows, 28 years before picking it up again. So I watched Power Rangers Lost Galaxy purely as an adult. And there were some things that I was really looking forward to, trying to see how they would connect it to Power Rangers in Space, and I still remembered a fair amount of the series, but Power Rangers Lost Galaxy was really the one where they just wanted to restart the story. They wanted to have a Power Rangers set of episodes that were not connected to the previous series. For example, they didn't use the same actors, they didn't use the same characters, and even Bulk and Skull have a parting ways. Bulk and Skull, the comedic relief duo, I'll talk about them later on, but they didn't even have a full presence in Power Rangers Lost Galaxy. It really was a type of new awakening, starting from the ground up, or, going to space, the final frontier, and actually getting the citizens into space, as opposed to just several stories. But I would really like to know about your personal experiences, so please drop them in the comments section down below. And if you're new to the channel, you can click the like button and subscribe, and an episode should come out every Wednesday. And I am your host, Box Ned. So, in terms of Power Rangers Lost Galaxy, I would first like to share the positives, the pros, the cons, what I liked about the series, and then I will share some of the things that I thought could have been improved upon, or just things that could have been done differently, or some things that just stood out to me. The first is that, over time, the characters became extremely likable. I mean, they all just seemed to really grow on me. You have Leo, the Red Ranger, you have Kai, the Blue Ranger, you have Damon, the Green Ranger, you have Kendrix, the Pink Ranger, and the Yellow Ranger was Maya. Now, I found that the best part of every single episode of Power Rangers Lost Galaxy was when Serena Vincent gets on the screen during the theme song, and you see Maya holding her flower, and even the beautiful music starts playing because she is a beautiful human being. Absolute best part of every episode. And one character that really changed me was Kendrix, played by Valerie Vernon. At first, I didn't think too much about her, and I thought she was going to be a bland type of background character, but overall, as a Pink Ranger, she actually proved to be one of the most likable characters in the entire series. And ultimately, though, she would have her fate, and it would not be very fortunate because Valerie Vernon was diagnosed with leukemia midway through Power Rangers Lost Galaxy, so she had to leave the show, and she was replaced by Melody Perkins from Power Rangers in Space. She played the villain Astronema as well as the character Corone, and she comes back as Corone the Pink Ranger And that episode was just absolutely one of the most dramatic setups, because you literally had Kendricks dying. They literally killed off a character in a battle scene, and I was just thinking, oh my goodness, I know that this is just a Power Rangers show, it's just a kids show, but overall, I mean, that really struck a chord with me, and a lot of people in the comments have been saying some very similar things, because after dozens of episodes, you just fell in love with Kendricks because she was the wholesome character. She was the lovable character. She's the moral compass. She's the voice of reason. However, it was done in a crossover episode with Power Rangers in Space, and the Pink Ranger from Power Rangers in Space, Cassie, was teamed up with Kendricks, and Kendricks was actually trying to save Cassie's morpher, and it really was set up so that Cassie could be the Pink Ranger in Lost Galaxy, so it seems, but I'm sure that they had some type of off-screen issue, and they ended up going with Melody Perkins as Corone. Melody Perkins was also amazing in the series. Very, very likable. Now, as far as the dynamics among these characters, you have Leo, the Red Ranger, who is starting out as somewhat of a rebel, a bad boy. He is somebody who sneaks on the ship Terra Venture, and he's going into space when he shouldn't have been there, and he was a stowaway. And they had a storyline where, again, his brother Mike is involved in a conflict, and you almost think like Mike is going to be the Red Ranger, but Mike dies once again. And I was also very shocked. However, he didn't stay dead for long, because he would come back shortly. But they really have this thing where it is a kid's show, where they don't actually want to just kill very lovable characters. But yes, Mike dies, and then Leo ultimately becomes the Red Ranger. However, Mike is resurrected in the form of the Magna Defender, and I must say, this Magna Defender storyline, that story arc, was one of the best Power Rangers moments that I have ever seen, and out of all of the series that I've watched, from the 90s era and onward, because that really showed that you had this story of the Magna Defender who lost his son Zika, and then he was trapped in a cave for 3,000 years. It's a story of revenge, it's a story of power, and they also found out that they were able to resurrect Mike, or that Mike was able to survive because of the Magna Defender, and he didn't go on to become the Black Galaxy Ranger, he became the Magna Defender. It's a very nice element, and a nice addition to the Power Rangers Lost Galaxy storyline. So, like the Red Ranger, like the Magna Defender, like the Pink Ranger, like the Yellow Ranger, like both of the Pink Rangers, actually. Now, some people have made some criticisms about Damon Henderson, who was played by Reggie Roll, the Green Ranger, and he's the mechanic of the group. And they're just saying this guy was never allowed to take a day off. In every scene, he's wearing his coveralls. He's wearing his mechanic's uniform. But they even had an episode of Lost Galaxy that showed that's what he wanted to do. That's what the character was focused on. He wanted to do mechanical things. He even had an opportunity to get out of it, but he chose to keep doing the mechanic's lifestyle. It's a kid's show. It's purely designed for kids. And, I just kind of got used to that. I'd say that the one character that I felt was a little bit underutilized was Kai, the Blue Ranger. And I was expecting that they were going to do a different type of feud in Lost Galaxy. And this is almost getting into the critical areas, but you have Leo the Red Ranger and then Kai the Blue Ranger. And I thought that they were going to do this setup where those two were going to fight over Kendricks, that she was going to be the love interest and you would have two guys competing for her. But ultimately that didn't happen. In the earlier episodes of Power Rangers, I mean, it's very, very obvious. You have romances that are going on, like Tommy and Kimberly. That might be the most famous one. How about Tommy and Kat? Or from Power Rangers in Space, you would have Andros and Ashley. And that was one of the most frustrating things from Power Rangers in Space. Even though it had been 28 years, it still bothered me, thinking about it sometimes when it randomly pops into my mind, where you would have Andros was trying to save his best friend Zane. He kept him on the ship. Zane was the Silver Ranger. And then when he's reawakened, Andros becomes jealous of him and Ashley, and they have this whole best friends type of feud, and I thought there was going to be a very big, intense rivalry between Leo and Kai, but that didn't happen because in Lost Galaxy, there really isn't a romantic angle. It's almost as if everybody is just friends with one another. There's a lot of insinuation, there are a lot of implications. There are times when they try to have romantic relationships with people who are outside of the Power Rangers, but it's not just like Kendrix is Leo's girlfriend, or that Maya is Leo's girlfriend, or that Corone is Leo's girlfriend. They all love Leo, but can I just be honest? Leo had a big mouth. Physiologically speaking, not making fun of him, just stating it, he had a big mouth. But like I said, overall, he was a pretty good Red Ranger. Now, we've talked about the Rangers, we've talked about their interactions. Let's talk about some of the villains. Firstly, Lost Galaxy gave us the introduction to Scorpius, and he was an amazing villain. Scorpius was an extremely powerful villain. He was grotesque. He was ugly. Can I just say it? He was ugly. It's not like I'm perfect or anything, but he was ugly. He was an ugly, powerful villain who's trying to wield universal omnipotent power and so on. That's his goal anyway. And he has a daughter named Trakina, played by Amy Miller. I must say it as well. I thought Trakina was a fantastic villain. She was tough. She had the look. Everything about her was extremely engaging. And they did recycle some of the storylines from Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Like, they have this one Mighty Morphin Power Rangers where Scorpina pretends to be an ordinary resident of Angel Grove to seduce Adam. Well, Trakina did something very similar going after Leo, and they even did one where they forgot Damon's birthday the same way that they forgot Zack's birthday during the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, and it's all a joke. But ultimately, there are some recycled storylines. But yes, Trakina was a villain who was trying to become stronger. And I don't know if she was meant to be a villain that was pure evil at first, but she definitely becomes more evil as time goes by. She's cold-hearted. She is someone who doesn't have redeeming qualities the way that Astronema did from Power Rangers in Space and the backstory of being Corone. And no, this just wasn't present with Trakina, but she was a villain all the same. And this might be a spoiler, but during the final episode, when she actually obtains a stronger form by going into the cocoon, then she was even more fantastic than that. Like, she actually looked like a distorted villain monster and so on, and that was really good because one of the themes and stories with the villains is that Scorpius wants his daughter Trakina to enter a cocoon so she can transform into a more monster-like feature which will expand her power, and she doesn't want to give up her beauty. Like I said, this was great stuff. Great stuff. Now, to talk about villains, who is the most underrated villain in Power Rangers Lost Galaxy? I would love to know your responses. They fought lots of monsters, they fought lots of bad guys. The most underrated monster was Fish Face. He has a terrible name, silly name, dorky character, but he was actually pretty good at beating up the Rangers. And I was actually impressed that this character, Fish Face, was very strong. Then you had Motor Mantis, who also beat the Rangers very easily. The mantis that likes to ride motorcycles and go fast. All right. I know it sounds a little bit silly, but he was a pretty good villain as well. So Fish Face would be number one. Then the second most underrated or underappreciated villain would be Motor Mantis. But I must give some pushback on the villains because those two are a little bit silly, right? And what I kept trying to tell myself was, this is a kids show. This is made for kids. It's not made for people in their 30s who watched Power Rangers 28 years ago. But at the same time, you have these great villains like Scorpius and Trakina, and then some of the other villains are just absolutely horrible. They're not fun to look at. They're almost too ridiculous for being 5 years old or 6 years old. Like, how about Captain Mutiny? He's the one that I'm going toward. He's the one that I'm thinking about because Captain Mutiny is this pirate who's also like a walking pirate ship who wants treasure and so on. And you have these great dark villains that have a serious storyline, and then you have someone like Captain Mutiny who is just a total clown and goofball. Although he was cold-hearted, I'll give him that. I'll give the creators that as well. So when we're looking at the construction of the villains, there they're just a little bit all over the map, really. But this is something that I may have just found because I'm watching edited versions. I would hope so. But when the Power Rangers are fighting the monsters and they're fighting, their villainous counterparts, they would get into the battle sequences, and then there would just be this time when the monster grows into a larger form and then has to fight the Galaxy Megazord. But what they didn't have in the episodes that I was watching is any reason for the monster to grow. It's just he gets defeated by the Power Rangers in costume, then he grows, and they end up fighting the Megazord. Maybe if you guys have watched something in like a longer form or an unedited form. That was left out of every episode, and that was one thing that I really noticed about, the villains during the era of Rita Repulsa, and even Lord Zed, and even Divatox, when they have reasons why they're doing what they're doing. And it's just so much is happening in a Lost Galaxy episode, it can get to the point where it's almost as if it just turns into a cluster fudge of actions and events. One thing that I really, really was not impressed with for this particular series was the Galacta Beasts. It's like they wanted to have a Megazord, but they have these Galacta Beasts, they seem a lot more organic than they do metallic. But so it's not quite a regular Megazord, and it's not quite just being in touch with Galacta Beasts. And I heard rumor that they wanted to get away from the Megazord angle, and they wanted to have these animalistic Galacta Beasts. That would have been better. But I found that the Galacta Beasts did almost nothing for the story. They did not make the stories more interesting, and the Megazord fight sequences did not make the stories more interesting. The Megazord fights in Mighty Morphin Power Rangers are some of the best moments of my childhood, absolutely. And with this set of events that they had in Power Rangers Lost Galaxy, it just really wasn't that exciting. It was so much more entertaining to watch the Power Rangers fight, as well as to look at the characters in their own dynamic storylines. Some additional things about the characters and the background. And most of them are from Earth, except Maya. She is from the world of Miranoi, and Miranoi is turned to stone at the beginning of Power Rangers Lost Galaxy, yet this was something that was rarely talked about. It's glossed over in most of the episodes. They do mention it from time to time about how Maya's homeworld was turned to stone, and that's one of the reasons why she's with the Power Rangers. But I don't know about you guys, but I just wanted to hear more about her life prior to being the Power Rangers. Like, she is not from Earth. She is not an Earthling. And they would show this in the title sequence, as I said, after that wonderful scene where Serena Vincent holds the flower. They would always show her swinging on a vine, meaning that she grew up in this type of jungle-like environment. Absolutely underutilized. Even if there's a more edited version out there in some longer episodes, absolutely underutilized in the stories. And because I watch them sequentially, sometimes like they would go 8 or 9 episodes without even mentioning that Maya's not from Earth, and at one of them they just ended by making some joke about how she's not familiar with earthly customs, and everyone's laughing, and I was like, whoa, I actually kind of forgot for a second that she's from Miranoi, because they don't talk about it. I can only expect that was done because in the older days they would put out an episode of Power Rangers and it would be on TV. We didn't have streaming, we didn't have YouTube, we didn't have platforms where people could watch it whenever they wanted. It would be on TV, and it would also be at your local video store. I actually started watching Power Rangers from VHS cassettes from the video store, VHS tapes, excuse me. But then, with the shows that were on TV, we watched the reruns over and over again. And that's really what I said about Power Rangers in Space. That became my show for after school for like the entire 5th grade, because it was just always on television, sometimes 2 or 3 episodes a day. And as a kid, you don't mind watching the same episode over and over again. So ultimately, I think they were expecting that this is something that they were going to show 1,000 times, that people had watched the first episode 1,000 times, not once, and then after 2 weeks you might forget what happened. But they did do certain things to show, like, that Maya was not a true Earthling, or that she's from a different world, because they had a whole episode about how she eats someone's birthday cake because she didn't know how they celebrate birthdays on Earth and so on. They did a little bit, but absolutely not enough. Absolutely not enough. So, I mean, I just can't really say anything bad, though, about Maya because, like I said, Serena Vincent was absolutely wonderful. Now, to talk about Bulk and Skull, I told you I would come back to that. I found that one of the most 50-50 responses that I had to Power Rangers was Bulk and Skull. One of the first things that I remember is just putting in that VHS tape from the video store and seeing Bulk and Skull in one of the episodes. I think it was from the Green Ranger miniseries, Green with Evil, and it started out with Bulk and Skull. And I really liked how they were consistently present throughout all of the Power Rangers episodes. And, we're talking 93 to 98 and so on. But at the same time, even as a kid, I remember thinking that, well, some of these storylines are getting a little bit ridiculous. Of course, it's entertaining to watch them try and find out the true identity of the Power Rangers. Then at one time, they wanted to become police officers. And I actually have no recollection of this. I read online that in in space, Bulk and Skull actually ended up trying to track UFOs with some guy named Professor Phenomenus. I don't remember any of that. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. In 28 years, he completely slipped out of my mind. But I did remember that Bulk and Skull were in Power Rangers in space. Like I said, it was extremely comforting and entertaining to have the same characters always there and just always present. But ultimately, I even had to admit that some of their storylines were a little bit ridiculous. So, in Power Rangers Lost Galaxy, it starts out with Skull being left behind and he doesn't go into space on TerraVenture, so you would just have Bulk and Professor Phenomenus, and then Bulk would ultimately make several different appearances throughout the show. He's mentioned in the credits several times, and he has certain moments when he appears on camera, but Bulk was not a regular cast member. I think you would call him a guest cast member throughout Power Rangers Lost Galaxy. But if anything, that was a nice connection back to the older days, and absolutely it was a nice connection back to the older days to watch the Power Rangers in Space Lost Galaxy crossover. I've referenced it many times, and I've also referenced a lot of the other characters from Power Rangers in Space. Absolutely amazing, entertaining, and if anything, that just reminded me about how good Power Rangers in Space was. That really was one of the better series because I've talked about this in some of the other episodes. I do love Power Rangers Zeo, but looking back, it really wasn't that good. I do love Power Rangers Turbo, but looking back, it really wasn't that good. Power Rangers in Space was an excellent set of stories. It was an excellent piece of kids' TV entertainment. With Lost Galaxy, they did some things different than In Space. The In Space Rangers had the same design for all the costumes, it's just different colors, like the same helmet and the same patterns, it's just different colors. With Power Rangers Lost Galaxy, it really is kind of so-so. Their costumes were mid, they have the black zigzag thing going on, which I would like to say is tolerable. It's not the best design, it's not the flashiest, it's not the chicest, it doesn't have that smooth sci-fi look like they did on In Space, but it's also tolerable, and it really is, it's not the worst thing in the world. I really found that the helmets on Power Rangers Lost Galaxy absolutely could have been better. They're trying to have this whole Galacta Beast feel, but really they just looked a little bit plain and just not very exciting. And I have an entire episode on Red Ranger helmets over the years. That is something that you might say is a personal passion, looking at Power Ranger helmets. I've been doing it for 35 years. But in terms of looking at some other things about their designs, in terms of weapons, they all use the Quasar sabers. I had no problem with that at all. Some people might remember the older days where you would have the power sword and the Green Ranger has his dagger and the bow and the lance and the axe, all of those great weapons from Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. These Rangers have the Quasar sabers. No problem with that at all. It was a good part of the story. The Quasar sabers allowed them to become Power Rangers and so on. And another thing that was really interesting is they had something called the Lights of Orion. And the Lights of Orion was something when all of the Galaxy Rangers get together, they can say Lights of Orion activate, and that will allow them to increase their powers. And it also increases the not only strength of their weapons, but even the overall shape of their weapons. They had several episodes where they were trying to track down these lights of Orion, and they could have really done a better job at explaining what these things were. At first, you don't even know what the lights of Orion are, but they really could have just used the lights of Orion more in the story. They could have made a better, more interesting, and more compelling story with the lights of Orion. But it kind of is what it is, and it's exactly as I explained it to you. When they say lights of Orion activate and all the Rangers have to be together, then they can increase their power and also increase the size of their weapons. So ultimately, I found that this was a fairly entertaining show, even for an adult. It could be a little bit silly at times, but it's part of the Power Rangers legacy. And as somebody who watched Power Rangers for years, when it went from my favorite show to just a show that I really liked, to movies that I really liked, to my comfort feel-good show, throughout the majority of the 1990s, it was a very good experience going back and looking at Lost Galaxy. But again, I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but if you're listening to this, you've probably already watched it. I'm just that kind of person who doesn't like to give away spoilers to anything, but when you're doing a full series review, you kind of have to. And I was like, they're on this city called Terra Venture, which is a city that is acting more or less like a space colony. It is a space colony. But for the majority of the series, I just kept sitting back and thinking, wait a second, this is called Power Rangers Lost Galaxy, yet they're not actually in the Lost Galaxy. They're still in the Milky Way galaxy the whole time. And it's not until the very end that they get into the Lost Galaxy, and there's some pretty good storylines there. Some pretty good fight scenes, minus the Captain Mutiny stuff. I mean, he was a ridiculous villain, but he was meant to entertain children, not adults. And then, as I said, they had some very powerful moments where Trakina goes into the cocoon, becomes more powerful, and then she has a very good showdown with the Red Ranger at the end. And the final thing is, not to give away a spoiler again, but Kendricks comes back for the final episode. And people told me this was going to happen. I could see it in the comment section on Facebook and so on, that Kendricks was going to come back. But I was still just like, oh my goodness. It was heartwarming. Like, it was just, even though I knew it was going to happen, it was just so emotional because it's just like that they have the awareness not to kill off a beloved character. And even though Kendricks wasn't featured in every single episode, she is in all of the title sequences, at least when I watched it. When they're playing the theme song, Valerie Vernon as Kendricks is always in the title sequences. And I thought that was very respectful to her. And, again, she had an amazing storyline, amazing character, extremely likable. I wish I knew her in real life. I wish there was a Kendricks in my life, and so on. But ultimately, I guess that's where I'll have to leave it now. I think we've covered all the bases. I'm not going to give any type of A rating or B rating or any type of percentages, 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10. I'm just simply going to say I love the series. I've given my honest criticisms, and I know I might have missed some stuff. One of the other reasons that I was watching Power Rangers Lost Galaxy was I did 2 Google searches. I'm not even joking with you, on Power Ranger helmets. I was looking at the Red Ranger helmet and the Green Ranger helmet, and then my news feed on Facebook and other social media places exploded with Power Rangers fandom, and like every third post was something Power Rangers related, and I was like, you know what, I stopped watching In Space in 98 or something like that, and let's just pick up where I left off and watch Power Rangers Lost Galaxy. And I was trying to participate in Power Ranger discussions with people like on Facebook and so on, but I simply just couldn't remember all the stuff. I couldn't remember the important details and so on. It had been 28 years, and really it had been about 31, 32 years since I had watched Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, as I said, on VHS tapes from the local video store. I don't even remember the name of that video store. It was in the it was in the shopping center next to the supermarket, but I remember what it looked like, and I remember what their cassettes looked like, but I don't even remember the name of that video store. Just too many years had gone by. But ultimately, I had a good time watching Power Rangers Lost Galaxy. It's all on YouTube for free. That will be all for me now. One more time, my name is Black Box Ned. I'm around on some other places on YouTube. But please, if you want, you can hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. And I'm going to do a full biography episode on Jason David Frank, perhaps the most influential individual to perform with the Power Rangers franchise. And then I'll be exploring some different subjects. And as you see, this is SFM TV and gaming. Definitely going to be looking at some more gaming related stuff in the future. That's all for me now. Everybody have a wonderful day.